Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast. Today I'm joined by an awesome creator and flexpert. We're going to call you a flexpert, Tashi. Let's do it. I'm joined by Tashi Dorjee. Where are you calling in from?
Sydney, New South Wales, yeah.
Calling in from Sydney, New South Wales. So a bit of background about Tashi. Back in 2014-ish, he co-founded a company called TwoSpace, which was in the restaurant/co-working industry. Grew to 70 spaces, had over 10,000 members. Closed that down in 2020, right? Around that time?
Around about a bit earlier, 18, 19, around about the time COVID happened. Very unfortunately, as you can imagine.
Yes. Around that time, you also did a deal, or you helped Hub Australia with a management agreement project, I believe, right? Or around the same time.
So it was almost a transition from the entrepreneurial startup stuff to, because I was doing different styles of deals when it came to co-working. I joined the Hub team, the leadership team, to figure out their earliest form of management agreement, because even back then, they're a very smart bunch who I learned a lot from. They pegged landlord partnerships even back then as a really great way to grow, not just because of the bespoke approach you can take to buildings, but even when you think about it as an operator, when you're answering to stakeholders, if you need to grow by 20 sites in the next 2 years, it'd be great if half of them were not pegged to an obligation or a risk like a lease, right? So that's the reason I joined them.
Fantastic. And talking about 2020, in 2020, you joined the JLL team as a senior director, FlexSpace Solutions in 2020. And what could go wrong? The world all needs flex spaces. Everyone needs an office. What was that like, making that jump from startup to corporate to being like, oh, at least I have a steady job now?
Dude, it was amazing because it was the first time I started getting paid as a first time founder with the TwoSpace idea, which was a lot of fun and I learned a lot. We made good money, but all of that went back into the business and paying our employees and stuff. So it was great. But to be honest, like, kudos to JLL. They took a huge risk and chance hiring me because I didn't really have any corporate experience or even commercial real estate experience to a degree. But they decided to risk it for the biscuit with me because they needed different thinking. And it's almost been 5 years now. And I'd like to think it's paid off because back then it was just kind of me, a single resource. But now we've grown to about 40 plus people, right, over the last 5 years. So if I get hit by a bus today, the business will still grow and thrive, which is what you call success in a startup, even within a corporate environment.
Absolutely. But please do not play in traffic. You have too much content and share way too much insights for you to go playing in traffic. So please don't do that. But yeah, it obviously paid off for them because you got promoted pretty sequentially, pretty quickly, right? You went from senior director of FlexSpace Solutions to then becoming head of FlexSpace in Australia and New Zealand in September that year. And then in 2022 to now head of FlexSpace across all of APAC. So obviously you're doing something right. And it's not just creating awesome videos on LinkedIn. It is also obviously something within the corporate world. So that transition was evidently a success for you, but also a good payback for JLL.
I'll take half that credit because what I definitely think my superpower is resilience and grit, which is what you need in this market, especially when it comes to flex, because as anyone who's within that business can appreciate, it's quite seasonal and sometimes it's the hot new flavor, sometimes it's not. And even when it is really well spoken about within the industry, that doesn't necessarily translate to growing a business or deals or whatnot. But the other half was a combination of timing. I think because of the pandemic, because of COVID, people really had to reinvent the way that office was treated. And that was really born, if you go to the grassroots of it, from how individuals like us even work and how companies want to take care of their employees. So it was a perfect storm. It's not, if I joined and did Flex 10 years ago, I don't think I would have had the same level of responsibility thrust upon me to figure out. I think it's just to a degree of luck, but yeah, it's good. It's good.
I'm not going to put all luck. I'm not going to let you get away with it. You've definitely shared a lot that shows you do know what you're talking about. Otherwise, we just wouldn't be having this chat. On that note, thank you for
Excellent.
joining me all the way from Sydney for this call and for sharing your insights with the whole This Week in Coworking audience. You are very much appreciated.
Thanks.
So the first time we mentioned you was around that time when you moved to JLL, and I think it was week 11 of 2022. That was the first 984-ish days since the time of this recording. That was the first time we mentioned you. How has, from at least your perspective, JLL's thinking about flex changed on a kind of holistic level?
Yeah, and I think this will be valuable to your listeners when I phrase this, because this is coming from a Fortune, I think 200 company now. I think it's ranked like 180th in the world on the Fortune list, and what their perception of flex has evolved into. When I first joined, there was a bit of resistance, frankly, because the narrative even back then was it was all or nothing. It was all office or all work from home. So flex was interpreted as competition to traditional leasing strategies or office strategies or whatever. So there was a bit of education required in that market, but it was also a great opportunity for traditional operators to approach landlords and be like, hey, hedge your bets, work with us. And it gave them that wiggle room to introduce the management style agreement or the hybrid lease, right, to offset some risk. But over the years, I would say, especially now, flex is super well received. Like almost to the point, the reason I've been able to elevate myself within the business and even do some of the crazy, interesting deals I can do today with landlords is because I have complete support from the JLL leasing team, from the tenant rep team, from the property asset management team, the work dynamics team, the project delivery services team. And you can already tell I'm listing all these massive business units within a corporate environment, because half the job when you work in a large business is the internal messaging just as much as the external. They all understand that flex is a complementary tool and value proposition to what they do. So for example, there's a huge campaign right now going called Value Beyond Leasing within Australia. And the whole idea is that, yeah, of course, you're still going to lease probably 90% of your asset the traditional way via long-term leases or spec suite strategies, especially in Australia. But by complementing that with a certain amount of flex or co-working within the building that really caters to the needs, it helps them do their job. And that's important because then as an owner, as a landlord, when you think about your asset from a valuation perspective, and this is why I think sometimes the messaging's wrong to the market from a flex perspective, because it still sometimes feels like I see a lot of it's all flex and co-working. We're not ever going back. And I think that's a bit too strong and heavy. Is, hey, in order for the flex business to thrive and grow, you don't need all of it. Imagine if we suddenly just every single new development, 10% of it was dedicated to a flex operator or a co-working offering. And then we innovated and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry, but we innovate the value proposition and the product offering so that we can make money, not just within the 2,000, 4,000, whatever square meters we operate in, but we start providing services to the rest of the 20,000 square meter asset. I think that's the future. I think co-working operators and flex operators is really the vehicle and the conduit to really provide that hotelification of buildings. And we'll get into that, but just because we say the word doesn't mean we can do it. There's some source required there to make sure that landlords feel like they're getting what they pay for. But yeah, just to wrap up that answer, I think the progressive huge change I've seen from these traditional corporate real estate services firms is they know flex is super important and it's just part of everyday business relations with their clients now. So we're always collaborating and figure out how to work together.
That is really interesting because a lot of the times when we do speak to the big corporates, especially a couple of years ago, some teams or organizations knew what it was, some kind of had this misunderstanding. So the fact that all these units are working together and supporting your flex team and doing what you're doing, that is progress, right? That's the things we want to keep hearing. And a lot of times operators, they don't know how to trust or work with large companies or big real estate firms like yourselves. So it's great to see that understanding is proliferating and people are understanding it has to be part of these interesting deals. But on that note, you did mention that you get to do some crazy, interesting concepts. What's one that comes to mind where you're like, how am I able to do this? This is a really creative idea, but yet they're saying yes. Can you give me an example of something like that?
Okay. And I'm a big fan of whatever our team is doing research development wise, I talk about it. I even put it in those little videos, flex videos I do, even though not many people watch them. But if you do, you'll be like, oh, he's just giving me the ideas and stuff, because I welcome everyone. Because I genuinely believe there is enough of the market around that we don't necessarily compete with one another. Like the fact that there is just so much in office right now that is looking for differentiation and adaptation without flipping the whole model on itself. It's almost like we represent the low-hanging fruit for them to do that, because also the deals we're trying to deal with them isn't too far-fetched or beyond what they normally do. So an example that I've been speaking to in the past, and we're delivering currently, one in New Zealand and one in Australia, is we have the flex within the building. And because we're a white label operator, we don't put the JLL brand in there. We even tweak the floor plan, the test fits, the products that go in there based on what tenants are asking for in the building, or what we think that target industry that they're trying to get and they will need, even though the majority of the floor plan is still private offices to generate that income. The whole thinking is, if you've already got a dedicated resource taking care of that NLA, and maybe you add a little bit of cost to it and seek a reward, why don't you become the operator that also services all of the other tenancies potentially, but especially spec suites? So in Australia, there's a lot of spec suites flooding the market, meaning they pre-fit out almost think of a 30 to 50 person style office, and they lease it out on 3 to 5 year terms. So people are thinking it competes with flex to a degree. I've heard a lot of that, but I don't think so. If they're putting in, let's say it's a 10,000 square meter building, they put in 1,500 or 2,000 square meters of flex, and then there's another 4,000 square meters of spec suites, and then the rest are tenancies that they leased out. Imagine if, as an operator, you can provide a laundry list of services to everyone in those spec suites, because they're technically just really large private offices that we don't want the risk of having to fill and hit our P&L as a flex operator, but you service them. So it could be a roaming community manager that normally lives within your flex tenancy. Whenever they get called upon, they can go up and do something up there. Virtual concierge, network and connectivity could be a big one, because we do that anyway as a flex operator for our customers. If someone comes in upstairs for a spec suite, we can sort them out with hyperspeed Wi-Fi. It's like things like that, because then the earning potential for you as an operator increases, because it's no longer how much can I milk out of the NLA that I'm, whether it's be renting or generating an income under a management style agreement. And then suddenly you become so valuable to the landlord, because you're like, shit, man, not only are they like delivering a flex experience on the lower floors or whatever you put, but I get to now go to market and be like, hey, you know how everyone's saying we're hotelifying real estate, blah, blah, blah. We're actually doing it. So if you get a spec suite on our floor, it's almost like room service or all that kind of stuff within our hotels. Things can happen. And whether they use it or not, but it's like the illusion of value for them to lease that space. So stuff like that's one example, because the way I do deals, which is a bit different to the traditional operators who I consider peers within the market and colleagues as well, is I reverse engineer a solution based on what's going to help that landlord's asset. And this is me putting the JLL hat on. So there's been some conversations where it's almost been like the landlord's like, shit, man, I've got 60% vacancy. We're going to spend a shit ton of money redeveloping this asset. It's going to be sexy. We would really love to be able to service all the different floors and spec suites. And then I'm like, we could do it, but it's going to cost you this much money unless you underpin it with a floor or two of co-working, because then we can leverage those on-site resources. And they're like, oh, okay. And then it's almost like a roundabout way for them to be like, we'll do co-working under a management agreement, because the real value proposition for us, as long as you hit some sort of rent equivalent on those floors, is you're essentially creating an ecosystem for our building. Right. So I'll stop there, but that's the kind of stuff we're messing around with right now that's being received super well. It's almost like sometimes you got to remember, landlords, even though we all know this stuff within Flex, and especially as operators of this side, and everything seems like old news to us now because we live and breathe it. A lot of these owners have no idea. When they hear Flex or co-working, they still think very old school, like WeWork, ServCorp, which are still great. They do what they need to do, but that's what they think. Once you start opening their eyes around the possibilities of flex and all these different things, like, holy shit, that's a really good idea. And then it just turns into a numbers conversation, right?
Absolutely. I really like that idea of, operating across the whole stack of the building. We're seeing a lot of opco, propco movements now where the team, someone owns the building, but there's another building company that manages the entire stack. And a few times JLL has come up and mentions all of these kind of plays. Is this
Mm.
pretty much what your kind of white label solution does? Is that the foundation of that product?
Yeah, so the reason it's called Civis is because, first of all, just to give you a bit of background, it's Latin for citizens. I didn't come up with the name. So if you like it, maybe I did. If you didn't, it wasn't me. Is because, first of all, JLL, knowing who they are, which is why they're great at what they do, they were like, no one's going to take us seriously as a co-working or a hospitality provider. They know we're great at commercial real estate and transactions and valuations and blah, blah, blah. But there was a conscious decision we needed to move away from that brand slightly, which funnily enough, the JLL brand is becoming really strong today versus 5 years ago, because there's a certain element of security with that brand. If you work with us, no matter what happens, we'll stick out with you because there's a moral obligation. Because it's almost, even though my team's growing, us on the grander scale of the JLL P&L is like a drop in the ocean compared to everything else. So I'm never allowed to piss off a client because it's almost, if I do a flex in their building and it's not going great because of the market, I'm not going to disappear because we do 100 times more business with them,
Yeah.
you know, in leasing or whatever. So that's strengthening it. But back then it was to rebrand it in a bit of a cool way rather than the red and the black and the brush strokes, which changed now. And also in the true spirit of not pretending a corporate real estate commercial company could do hospitality, it represented a partnership with the Core Hospitality Group. So if there was ever an element for a cafe style offering or a restaurant offering, they wanted that hotel style concierge, rather than say we can do it and outsource it, we'd bring them in to do it and wrap it together. So that's why, and rather than go, hey, it's JLL and Accor doing this together, we present it as Civis. And then in terms of the product offering Civis can offer, it really is in the spirit of white label. It's whatever you need. I think that's the main difference. That's why you'll never see the Civis team or portfolio grow from 10 to 20 to 100 to 200, because our aspiration for success is not a mega portfolio that one day, whether I move on or get hit by a bus or whatever, JLL is suddenly responsible for a shit ton of sites, like a huge portfolio. That sounds like a headache. It's more about, if very important investor clients have a problem and it can be resolved by some form of flex solution, but they don't want an off-the-shelf flex solution. They need something tailored, whether it's smaller than usual, whether it integrates with the building, whether it's a takeover, because we've taken over some sites that have been handed back. Because frankly, as a landlord, when you get handed back a site, they suddenly have to go through, I can either give it a shot with the existing fit out or spend millions of dollars gutting it. And then if I do a new deal, the incentives in the Australian market are quite high now. It's 40% of an incentive. So over here, if you do a 7-10 year lease, landlords are giving half of that upfront as cash most of the time to that tenant so they can pay for their fit out and or abate their rental obligation. We can do that too. Yeah. And so it's whatever you need, we'll figure out. So sometimes we do pretty traditional deals, which look traditional, but the target demographic of that site is very tailored. So like universities, med tech, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes we do very weird looking deals, which is, I think, super helpful to your audience, because it's almost like I'm out there experimenting, and whether it works or fails or whatnot, at least I'm trying all these weird different things. So if something does work, it's, hey, there's precedent for it. Maybe try that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were saying before we got onto this call that you're going to keep coming onto the podcast and sharing some of the things you tried and maybe didn't work in Australia, but might work somewhere else, or things that you tried and they're hockey sticking. Yeah, I'm really excited to dig into a few more of those and a few more episodes throughout 2025. I can't believe it's already 2025.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It's coming right up. But before we go to 2025, is Civis only available in Australia or APAC, or is it available worldwide?
APAC. I think worldwide, we have a team in the US and EMEA, and that's more of a straight up JLL offering. So we realized within the APAC region, and it's also because JLL kind of the way it almost operates in different islands in terms of businesses, we recognized our value proposition to clients here was something bespoke for their assets and something cool. So that's why we went down that angle. Plus, from a risk appetite perspective, it sounded a lot more appetizing for us as a business, because we're not a flex operator, right? Even though we operate sites. So I know that's a bit of an oxymoron to not have the 5-year plan result in 100 sites. The 5-year plan is more, hey, we're going to do 10, 20 really cool sites and show the market how we're taking care of really good clients, because then they'll do more business with us in other areas. We'll prove to the market we know what we're doing. We'll be thought leaders because we're trying new things. And then to a degree, when you think about it, the reason I exist and my team's growing isn't because our core KPI isn't necessarily just to get on new site and carve fees out of it. So we keep getting those compound those management fees like a traditional operator would, right? More sites, more money, that kind of stuff. It's whilst we do that, how can we help facilitate this huge leasing appointment on this building? Because they need a flex strategy before they even want to go RFP to the market. How do we make sure JLL gets that? How do we make sure that if they're going to design and build this new asset and this client's about to spend $200 million, how do we provide some guidance on what the ground floor or lower floors should look like if they do want to provide some form of flex offering? Again, it may not be us, it could be someone else. We're involved in such early conversations like that. I find it really, I'd like to think we're helping the flex ecosystem, because it's almost like all the opportunities that are going to hit the market, at least in APAC in the next couple of years. Take some solace knowing that you've got me on your side, not trying to win those deals because we don't want them necessarily, influencing the building so that it'll slot one of you in one day. You know what I mean? Helping out on that side. So because we're having that wider real estate conversation, it just changes what success looks like for my team, which means we can do things in a bit of a quirky manner.
That's really, there's going to be another question I had to follow on, which has there been, or is there a case where you're like, we're not the right fit. This is better for an impact for a Hub Australia. This is better for a Watso. This is better for an Industrious or something like that.
Man, heaps. And there's times I'm like, hey, should I have gotten a referral for that or something like that? Because I go to, because again, it's almost like the early stage conversations I have with a landlord or an investor, I have my JLL cap on. I don't have my Civis cap on. So I'm an expert within the JLL field. You're speaking to brokers and everything, trying to figure out what your strategy is. Let me show you what I think could work or what should work based on what the market is telling us for your building. And then I only put on my Civis cap when they're like, hey, we'd like to see if you could do it. And most of the time they ask us to do it isn't necessarily because they think we're the best offering in the market, because I'm very transparent and honest saying, hey, if you want this style of experience, let's go with XYZ. It's because we may already be leasing the building, or we already might be managing the whole building as a property manager. So there's economies of scale and synergies if we start doing all of that for them all under one roof. And some clients are like, oh, too many eggs in some baskets, or others are like, hey, that's a really good idea because then we don't have to deal with too many stakeholders. One really interesting point is the strength of the white label offering when we deliver it is you can craft it to your building and you can create something really special and unique. However, one challenge I find is that if it's in a relatively tough market or an unexperimented area, there's a lot of value in putting a known brand in there. If the owner does not give a shit about tailoring it too much, if you put in a hub or a commons or a work club in a certain building, because they've got a 10 years worth of branding and community behind that name and brand, in most cases, you'll see potentially a wait list or a healthy occupancy boost day one, right? Because, and even to the degree when, even if you think about it from a pre-marketing perspective or sales perspective, even though they're going to put the same thing in that building, they can pre-tour people, hey, check out this side, not too far away. It's going to be the same thing, same but different. But then that way people know what they're buying.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do something white label, I have very honestly found, and it's overcomable as long as you hit that 30% occupancy day one, because you give yourself enough time and you pre-market it. It's happy days, and then you worry about the ramp up in year one. But you're creating a brand from scratch, man. You know what I mean? So and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's tough. It's almost like there's a lot of effort that goes into not just the branding of it, but now you got to communicate this to the market. And people are like, what is this cool? And then when you can't necessarily pre-show the space because you're building it and you don't have another one. But that's a decision the landlord makes, and it's a risk that they weigh up when they're like, oh, no, we want to do this because our decision to do this is a long-term one.
I get that. So I'm wondering if one day we'll see Civis hand over keys to another operator. where it's okay, we've got this launched, we're like, this is not our business, not here to, as you said, have 1,000 sites. We've got you from 0 to 1. This is better for another operator, internal, train your team, whatever it is. So I'm thinking that maybe that could be something. Now, obviously, it's too early now for us to have seen that, I don't think. But looking ahead,
No, but I think you're right. Yeah, you're right. I think we've done deals, and this just shows how flexible we are, where the conversations have been so honest with the owner, where it's like, hey, dude, just treat us as a glorified trading partner. We'll design, build, and operate it, get it up and running for 2 years. So we do all the hard work to fill it for you. And then if you want to do it yourself or put someone else and just boot us off, it's fine. It's almost like when I look at a deal, if I really help that client, and obviously it makes sense commercially, I do not see it as a failure if we get replaced or if they do it themselves. Because also our model is sometimes, because JLL has a construction management business unit, the project delivery services, if we get to project manage the build and we also have a design team, the difference between us and our P&L as a business versus a traditional operator is their fees kind of start kicking in once the site's up and running and they pay their rent and then they take their margin.
Yep.
Whereas if it's a $5-10 million build, but we manage that and take that percentage out of it, we've already got that upfront kind of nest egg. It also means that our management fee, whether it be per year, we can bring it down significantly while still in motivating us to do well, which actually makes the smaller sites work for us, which normally wouldn't work for a traditional operator because the site doesn't make enough money for us to take our fee and whatnot. So it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's why I think if we ever had to hand it back or take over, it's totally fine. Because I genuinely believe some of the best deals we've done today, the relationship with that owner has blossomed into them doing more business with JLL elsewhere. Because we were almost the Trojan horse to demonstrate we're different, right? We listen, we're doing some cool shit, and then we deliver. And then they're like, hey, you know what? We haven't done business with your leasing team or your whatever. And then it happens, right?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I love that. I love that approach, value-based Trojan horse, put it that way.
Yeah, imagine if like your tradition, and sorry, like I keep bloody ranting, but I've had 3 coffees already this morning and it's only 9 a.m. Imagine if you're running a business. Just think of it this way. As an owner of a flex business, this is my world, right? Your world is, imagine if you have one column, and I know I'm oversimplifying, where success for you and growth for your business is more sites, more income. That's all you need to worry about. So you're thinking about growth next year. I need 3 more sites in these key locations, maybe 5, if we can get the right deal. And then it turns into more of a negotiation with the owner to get that best deal up front, or whether you do a pure management agreement. For me, there's almost like 3 columns. There's that, which is the more sites, more money. There's the, how can I influence the design and the construction of these new buildings? Because we take a percentage of that potentially. And then the third one is, how can I help other businesses within JLL win more work or get appointed to stuff? So you can see, because I've got 3 buckets to dip into, the way I'll even approach a problem with a landlord or even flex for a landlord is super different. So before I even dive in to try and pitch them on, I can operate this for you, it's already, all right, I'll come up with some ideas that'll help whatever the wider leasing strategy is or the management strategy is. B, if you're building something, I'll help you with that thinking. And if you require, we can do test fits and all that kind of stuff for you. And then at the very end, then it's said, yeah, if you'd, I can show you what it would look like if we operated it, even if it was just a feasibility exercise for you. Because half the time after I do that, they go, cool, it looks like it works. We're going to RFP it now.
That's all awesome, Tashi. But so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is actually, based on what you said on the shift and helping landlords understand the economics, the fundamentals, the operations, all of that about flex, and seeing that, hey, there are other people out there who can do this better. What else are you seeing from like the landlord perspective with regards to how they think about flex as we go into 2025? Because it's been a journey. So if you had to tell operators like one thing that they should know about or at least learn about when dealing with landlords, what would it be?
I think it's coming back to what I've been touching on this whole call. Think bigger than the NLA you're responsible for. If you can communicate as part of your value proposition how you're going to help the rest of the building, I think that is so important, because landlords right now, when you think about it, even though office is set to look stronger next year, they're always battling with
the occupancy of their asset, which means that they're fighting a battle on behalf of their tenants who are fighting the battle of how do we get our employees back in the building. And the answer to some of that via the flex route and via operators like us is how can we extend the experience to those tenancies or welcome them within the flex tenancy? How do we activate the building? Everyone already knows all of this stuff, but if you can just make sure that you articulate that whenever you speak to an owner, I think it's super important. And the spec suites with the service stuff that we're pushing pretty hard on. If anyone's interested, get them to reach out to you or me. I'm happy to share the thinking on how you monetize it or what the model is, because we're working on that through right now. I think that's like a bit of a no-brainer, because if you're in the building and these are for the larger ones and they need that serviceability, offer it. And then you're way stickier as an operator. And then the next site that you might do, I find with especially these larger landlords, they'll think of you for their next one, because if you are helping them come up with a brand as well, there's strength in these owners thinking that they can network that brand out. So suddenly own something that means something to their tenants, and then they can do multiple brands of that across their portfolio. And this advice also goes to even some of the more boutique operators who have a smaller space but are doing some really cool shit in smaller buildings. Don't underestimate your ability to still talk to that landlord when you're negotiating something, or if you're looking at a new site, and explain to them what you can do for them. Because the smaller buildings, they don't have enough budget to have a building concierge, for example, or to put on as much activation in that asset, even if there's no space. If suddenly you start talking to them for your next site and be like, hey, we know you're a smaller asset, but we're going to take this lease here or do it on a management agreement. We'd love to do stuff for your tenants to help out. I think we live in a world where there's so much opportunity for blue sky thinking here. You don't have to follow a blueprint of how I do deals or someone else do deals. Figure out your own deal. Every landlord is different. Every asset need and problem is different. So it could literally be the first of its kind, but you figure it out with the owner because they have a certain need that you can facilitate. And it can be as simple as you've got a headcount of 2 or 3 in your site. What if you do a bit of extra work or add some stuff to someone's scope without making them go, screw this, I quit because it's too much work? But you get paid for it by the landlord because they've got budget for these kind of things. And then suddenly you're thinking about monetizing your experience outside of the flex space or whatever. I think that's huge. And the only other thing I would say, because I'm getting direct feedback from landlords, is even though the hospitality angle is great, don't just use the word and say you can do it if you can't do it. Because there's a lot of landlords coming to me now going, we were promised hospitality, we were promised the world. And this is not just flex operators. This is also low-key hotel operators entering the commercial world. And then they're like, oh, but we now just have a teenager on a visa behind the counter who remembers names and says hello, but there isn't all of that activation and everything that comes with it. So use the word, but really figure out how you're going to deliver that experience beyond just a barista and some coffees. What are you doing? And this comes back to just a really quick random tangent. There's a saying in the hotel world called surprise and delight. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we need to do that more in co-working, especially if we're trying to become like a hotel, which essentially is how do we constantly surprise and delight our members or our guests or our tenants? And a very old example, this was what Hilton used to do before they had technology and everything, is after a guest would stay in their room, they would actually go through their trash in a very gross way. And for example, Hector, if you were staying at the Hilton decades ago and they found an apple core in your trash, the next time you would come, they would put an apple on your bedside table. So that kind of bespoke service offering. And I know that's a very old example, but try and figure out what that means for you today, because it doesn't necessarily mean put apples on their desks, but even through technology is your friend right now with AI and everything. How can you enhance your app experience if you've got one, your platform experience? How do you create magic moments on that to really even extend your offering beyond the co-working space? Because like I'd be fascinated, and maybe a conversation for another time, even if you've got, as a co-working operator, people licensing offices within your space, are they there 5 days a week? And if not, if they're only there 2-3 days a week, which is totally fine, that's how most offices use these days, is there a way you can enhance their experience working from home, even though they're not in your space? Is that through technology? Is it through an app? Is it through a platform, which you can then charge for? You never know. It could be a small additional subscription service, whatever you charge for Netflix. Hey, suddenly if this co-working operator has figured out technology so they can connect people even when they work from home.
Yeah.
I think that's untapped. Like that even comes back to the TwoSpace business that I started way ago. Our value proposition beyond the spaces and connecting them all was the technology, to the point where I think it's needed so much right now. I would not be surprised if I even look at that stuff again at some point as a side piece of tech or whatever, because I think it's much needed when people are working from home and employees are trying to figure out how to stay connected with their employees when they're not in the office.
Absolutely. Firstly, I would not bet against you if taking another swing at startups. So let us know what you land up doing. Secondly, I'm definitely seeing an overlap between kind of the technology rewarding outside spaces and this huge trend of what's it called? Fractional offices. So 3 or 4 using the same offices. How do you reward them on the days that it's not their office, making the product even stickier? And that's just really fascinating. But I do love this idea of operators expanding out of their square footage, servicing the rest of the buildings, and really diverging into that revenue you stack. But it also comes down to something you have mentioned a bit in this call, and that's all about branding, right? It's one thing to have a new brand per building. We've had a conversation with Johnny over at SpaceMate in the UK. They had the same issue, creating new brands for every landlord, bespoke properties, bespoke deals, again and again, and they landed up having all these different brands. But the one thing that operators do have, and this is something that you definitely have, and why I'm bringing it up now, is this personal brand, right? Telling the story, being fearless through thought leadership, and just oversharing and giving away the farm, as people would say it. Because I think being that confident allows people to be like, oh, what isn't he telling us? What is the secret sauce that he's still got behind the scenes? But my question for you, and it's going to be the last one for our call, because we could just talk about this all year. And we probably will have many more conversations next year. But my question for you is, how much do you think your personal brand and the videos you create, even if it's like the 10 people watching it, who are those 10 people, right? Is it impacting the work that you're doing in the corporate world?
I think a lot. When I do stuff like that, I do not measure success of it based on lead generation. It's not traditional marketing for me in the sense that, oh, if I do videos, I will have leads come my way. I don't see it that way. I almost see it as an opportunity to build trust. So it's almost like if you are consistent and you do it and you share value and you don't try and sell them all the time, it's this thing that you can't measure almost, which is why a lot of people don't do it, because there's not this like digital marketing agency out there measuring trust. It's like, how do you do that? But I feel like because the conversations we have are so complicated compared to traditional real estate deals, you need that trust, man. Like you need them to be able to sit across you. Even if it's the first time you've met, maybe they've watched some of your videos, maybe they've read some of your thought leadership articles. Like they go, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. I trust him. Plus, he's got tenure. He's got muscle memory. He's been at JLL for 5 years. He's not hopscotching across different roles, across different agencies. So I just know he's going to do the deal for the sake of it because he doesn't care, because in 3-5 years' time, he's not going to be there.
Yep.
So it's almost the best thing I can do from an indirect sales perspective is build trust. And how do you build trust? There's even books out there, or you need to meet someone this many times, or they need to listen to your content this many times. So it's funny, like I'm not saying everyone needs to run out there and do content, do what you feel comfortable. I just feel very lucky that for some reason I enjoy doing it. So because I enjoy doing it, because I try and be authentic through my videos and share that stuff, I'll never really look at a metric for a long time. Even on the side, from a personal perspective, I'm doing YouTube videos around startups and starting businesses to help first-time founders. I've made a promise to myself to do a video a week, put some effort in the production, and not give a shit about how many subscribers or views I have for 2 years. Because for me, I'm 30, turning 37 in Jan. My investment in that is by the time I'm 40, I'll have a community and a platform to share insights, but also monetize through ad sharing revenue via YouTube and all that kind of stuff. Very similarly, even from a corporate perspective, to bring it back to the LinkedIn stuff and Flex, we're doing a small volume of negotiations and deals every year versus a lot of other fast-moving consumer goods.
Yep.
And what's going to help you, right, in those? You almost think about it from a metrics perspective. Would you rather 1,000 leads a year? Not saying that's how many we get from a landlord perspective, but you've got a 1% conversion rate. Or would you rather have 300 leads a year, but your conversion rate is 10%, because the conversations you're having are way more thoughtful. You're trusted, you're a brand. The fact that they come to you, they know what they're getting. And yeah, I really believe in it. Like even the stuff that you're doing, Hector, like this is the first time we're having a really engaged conversation, but because of the consistency and the discipline and the conversations that you have and you put out there, it's like there's already this element of trust and respect and admiration before we even engage, because you're like, okay, and we haven't even met. So think about it from that angle. It's if you can create something like that, why not? And you don't have to do it even one a week. Just do it once a month, every now and then. But don't try and don't conform to this. Oh, I need it to be hooky. I need it to be like a TikTok. Just be you and expect no one to watch it. But if you do it enough times and you share good stuff like value, there's a saying I love, which is just because you watch Bruce Lee movies doesn't mean mixed martial arts, right? People will love it, people will get value out of it, and then they'll want to have conversations with you. And then when you eventually do engage, there's this baseline of, okay, cool, this guy knows what he's talking about. We can have a measured conversation. And what you'll find is most, even new conversations I have right now, we don't even do like presentation packs or anything. It's like literally here, if you want, here's the capability statement, here are case studies. And then it's, hey, what are you trying to do with your building?
Yep.
And then it just turns into a chat. And then it's almost, and this is why I love my job right now, it's literally a chat. And then it's, hey, if you want to do due diligence on us, here's the pack. Go through it at your leisure. Someone spent a lot of time building this thing. But let's just talk about your building and figure it out. That's where I want to keep going, right?
I love that. And if you don't know the videos I'm talking about, folks who are listening in or watching in, I'm going to drop a link in the YouTube description and the podcast description to see some of the videos. I'm a huge fan of your videos, Tashi, and thanks for the kind words about the consistency. But I want to finish with just that point, right? Community operators, FlexSpace owners who are watching and listening to this, put out content. And if you're worried about the vanity metrics, share them with me. My job is to signpost people to the people who are talking about interesting, creative, innovative things in our industry. And my job is to help elevate the number of people who see that. So put the content out, share with me. It'll be my honor to share it with the rest of the world. On that note about honor, Tashi, thank you very much for joining me. I know we jumped through a whole bunch of technical hoops this morning. So thanks again for bearing with me and making this happen. I cannot wait to have you back on the show next week, next year. Thank you.
For sure, man. Me too. I'm super looking forward. Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.